exhibit. Kind of a little play on words there. All righty. All righty.
Okay, looks like we're ready to go. Well, nice to see you this morning. I'm down from Fort Collins. I think that first thing I'd like to do is, I'm a teacher for the last 35 years, as well as being a consulting engineer, and I am used to teaching adults, not kids, but in adult learning theory, we like to get a lot of interchange with the audience or the students. I'm not treating you like students, but I am going to try to get some interchange going among us. And, you know, this is called coffee and conversation. Well, it's not coffee and monologue, okay? I don't want you just listening to me. I'd like you to get involved. I'm going to ask you some questions, not to point things out, but just to elicit an answer for you. If I call on someone I can't call on anybody by name except my friends here and my friend in the back, but I won't do that. And if I point at you and you just don't either know an answer or don't want to be involved, you are free to pass. But let's try to get a little bit of interaction going here. And so just so we get to know each other a little bit, how many are Army vets here? Lots of Army vets. Of you, how many served in Vietnam? Most of you. How about Navy vets? Okay, good group there. Air Force? We got a good distribution here. Marines, that count Navy. Do you count yourself as Navy? No. No. You're separate, right? And then I noticed a picture of the Coast Guard boat up there, cutter boat. Anybody from the Coast Guard happen to be here? Might be a little rare, but anybody have a VA disability? Anybody have a VA disability? Anybody have a VA disability from Vietnam that does not include exposure to Agent Orange? Anybody who does not? My disability includes hearing, and you'll see why from some of the slides, exposure to Agent Orange with some nerve damage that resulted from it, PTSD, not from this tour. This was a good tour. My second tour, 70-71, was up in the Central Highlands when things were in Pleiku, where things were falling apart and things were degenerating, and that was a different story up there. But if you are a Vietnam vet and have not pursued potential compensation for exposure to Agent Orange, you really ought to look into it or see me afterwards. I think I've kept track of, you know, the rules have lightened up considerably. You do not, if you were in the Navy, you do not have to have even set foot on land. You could just have stayed offshore. If you're in the Air Force and you just dropped into Tan Son Nhut to refuel, you are potentially qualified for Agent Orange exposure. But there's a good website out on it. See me afterwards. I'll try to fill you in if you're interested, and we'll go from there. This tour was my first tour in Vietnam. I'd kind of like you to put you in the mindset of where I was at that time. I was not an old guy, all right? We're all old guys, but I was not an old guy. I was a young captain in the Army Corps of Engineers. I was 6 years out of the military academy, class of 1960, and I found myself saddled with some very, very, very extensive and pretty difficult for a captain duties. In fact, I spent much of my time fencing off with two-star generals, and I even got a chance to talk to General Westmoreland in terms of some decisions that need to be made. So kind of view what I have to say is, wow, that was a captain and he had to do that? because it was a great tour, a great engineer's tour. And at the time, my wife and I had 3 boys. At the time that I was in Vietnam, the wives that stayed home were called waiting wives. Didn't want to use the word widows in any way, shape, or form, but waiting wives. Do we have any waiting wives in here whose spouse or husband or significant other served a tour in Vietnam? Okay. I was going to say, if there were any, they're the true heroines of deployment in Vietnam. They had the job of, it's called a hardship tour. We were so busy on a job, time went by fast. But our wives had to watch the kids, take care of the house, pay the check, take care of the car. They're the true heroines of deployments, both for Vietnam and for any other deployment that there might be. So with that, and knowing a little bit more, I had 2 things for those of you that have been in Vietnam. There are 2 phrases that I absolutely cannot get out of my head, okay, even these 57 years later. And they seem to be used for every purpose, and maybe in sometimes appropriate or inappropriate, but there's one that was 3 words, and no swear words, okay? Does anybody remember a 3-word phrase that everybody used no matter what the circumstances? Sometimes appropriate, sometimes inappropriate. Like, for example, what if you were sitting with a friend and you had just been served, had your chow plate filled up with food, and he sits down and by mistake he drops his food upside down in the mud? What did you say to him?
No big deal.
No, not that. It starts with the word sorry. Do you remember the phrase, sorry about that? Everything that ever happened in Vietnam seemed to be, whether it was happy, bad, just received a Dear John letter, sorry about that. And it just seemed to be everywhere.
The one I remember was, we gotta get out of this place.
Well, that was close, but that was one of the most favorite songs, right? Did you ever see a USO show that they didn't lead off with the song, we gotta get out of this place? Right. And the other one is kind of related to that. Let's say that you and a friend, you're off duty, you and a friend are heading for the club to grab a beer or 2, right? It's raining. The mud is up over the top of your jungle boots, and you see a Jeep over there. And you know, the Jeeps don't have a key in it to turn it on and off, so you had to be careful to get a chain around the steering wheel and hook it to the iron on the driver's seat, because that was the only way to keep it from getting stolen. So you're slogging through the mud, you're looking down, you're going to get a beer, and you say, hey, there's a Jeep without a chain over there. Maybe we could take it. And your buddy says, no. We might get in trouble. And so you say, no, let's take it. We're not stealing it. We're just going to take it to the club. We're going to have our beer, and we're going to bring it back and part it right here. And the reason is, hey, what can they do to us? Can they send us to Vietnam? I mean, we're already here. There's nothing worse that they can do to us, So that was the excuse for edging or coming up against the edge of a number of regulations and things that you should or should not do, because what are they going to do? Send us to Vietnam? I remember those 2 phrases very, very, very distinctly. Well, here's a picture I took. I'm proud of it, Vietnam at its best. And I think you'll have to agree, serving in Vietnam, it was difficult, but it was still a very beautiful country. I dealt mainly with the coastline. That's the pictures that you will see here primarily. I took this picture. I can't remember where it is. If anybody I know it's not Vung Tau. At first I thought it was Vung Tau, but it's more hilly country. I think I took this picture on the second tour up in the Central Highlands. If anybody recognizes this, or I need to find someone who speaks Vietnamese, I'd like to know where this picture is. But what we'll do is talk about civil engineering on the edge. Okay, I'm a civil engineer, I'm Corps of Engineers, and by saying on the edge, I mean under combat conditions and under conditions of extreme pressure as far as time and timing are concerned. And so those will, in effect, be our discussion of how the ports got built in Vietnam. Most of the deep draft ports between 1966 and 1967, when I served as the chief of the port construction section. And just a little introduction for myself. Have a PhD from CSU and Master of Science from University of California at Berkeley. I am still working at 87. I'm still working, part-time, but I'm still working. Hey, that may be a distinction in this crowd, but I like my work. And I'm also retired Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army, Corps of Engineers. What we're going to do, in the beginning, I'm a 1960 graduate of the Military Academy at West Point, so I thought I'd start out here. This is a picture of me with my first command, if you want to call it that. And it is at what we call, what passed for boot camp. It's called Beast Barracks. These new cadets, this is in July of, would have been 58. These new cadets have just come in, and they're going to spend 2 months over the summer getting indoctrinated and familiarized with the customs and characteristics of serving in the Army. And to guide them along the way is, this is the beginning of my junior year, so I have been there 2 years at the Academy. Now, one thing that I like about this picture is it shows the difference. Here's actually 7 very, very, very green new cadets, and here is 2 years later. This is what I looked at, and just as scared 2 years before this. Do you think that the Military Academy over 2 years did something to increase my confidence, increase my sense? Any question who's in charge here? No, there's a big difference. But there's a secret about that. There's a psychological trick being played here on these poor new cadets. The cadre here, which I was part of, the new cadets are in their kind of baggy old khakis and things like that. And no matter where we were dressed in the next uniform more formal. So how can you look as good as this if you're wearing that? But it kind of sets the stage between up and down. But every now and then we have a reunion, and my classmates, class of 1960, ask for pictures back in the day, and I sent this in. They really harassed the heck out of me. What do you see in this picture? This is during boot camp. What do you see in this picture that my classmates would jump all over me about?
They're smiling.
Why are they smiling? This is supposed to be, we called it Beast Barracks, or we just for short called it Beast. We're supposed to be terrorizing these guys. We're supposed to be tearing them down to their essential elements and building back up into the image that the Army has of them. They're smiling. And I have taken more flack from my classmates. He said, your squad looks like it's on a Boy Scout camporee, and you're supposed to be scaring the heck out of these guys. No, I don't believe that. I'm not a terrorizer. I'm not a scarer the heck out of it. It doesn't bother me that there's some smile on here. I believe in motivating. I believe in supporting. I believe in creating a team spirit, and that approach, rather than being dogmatic has stood me in good stead for 21 years in the Army and 45 years as a consulting engineer. So, and I thought our goal was not to terrorize these guys, but to get them prepared over the first 2 months they're there to join the Corps of Cadets. And I'm proud to say that I followed their careers as they went through their 4 years at the Academy. Every one of those new cadets graduated, right? I consider that to be a success. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. Where'd we go? Let's see how I get back. We don't want to go through all of them. I'm way down the line now. Oh, this will give you a little preview. No.
We've already seen that.
Yeah. I pushed the wrong button. But I don't think there's any easy way to get back without...
We're still smiling. There you go.
Okay, here we go, here we go, here we go. Push the wrong button, I won't do it again. Mr. Kobayashi here, Roy Kobayashi, who's smiling the most, his first class year, he ended up on a brigade staff, and he had stripes from the top of his shoulder down to his elbow. He did extremely well. So anyway, enough about that. Doesn't really have much to do with ports and port construction, but let's move on. Little background, and this is kind of the way we'll try to get between now and 10:15-ish or so. A little background, I was slated and I'd been picked to go back to the Department of Mechanics that teaches both solid mechanics and fluid mechanics and be an instructor. And before I went back to that, they were going to send me back to graduate school to get a master's degree. At the same time, the personnel people of the Corps of Engineers were looking for a young captain Corps of Engineers who could go back to school and get training as a coastal engineer, because the military was looking at a need for a huge buildup in the port capacity. And you'll see why in a minute. And so they were horse trading back and forth between the Department of Mechanics that was willing to send me back to get a master's and the personnel people who wanted me to go back and get a master's in coastal engineering and come over as the port construction engineer. But right after getting a master's, no going back to the academy to teach. You're going to go to Vietnam for a year, 66 to 67, and be the port construction engineer. So they were horse trading back and forth, and unfortunately, I was the horse. But they decided that, to prepare him to teach fluid mechanics at the academy, a coastal, not postal, I didn't go to school to learn how to stamp stamps. Coastal, not postal, a coastal engineer degree would fit in very well with the curriculum in the fluid mechanics side of the Department of Mechanics. And so they asked me, if you had your choice, where would you like to go to get an MS in coastal engineering? And I said, absolutely, University of California at Berkeley. They have the best coastal engineering curriculum and program in the country. So I had orders to go to Berkeley, California. And we spent a busy year, but a very, very enjoyable year there. But I had a summer session to kind of get prepared, because I'd been out of school with a BS for 6 years and I'd forgotten how to study, actually, is what the problem was, or how much work it was. And then I had 2 semesters to finish up a Master of Science degree, and then I didn't even have time to go to graduation. I had to get my family settled somewhere where my wife would stay with the kids, and then I was on my way to Vietnam. So I got there. Turned out to be the best engineering job that I've ever had. Turned out to be one of the hardest years that I've ever had, because I was away from family for 13 months. And my 3 boys at the time were 6, 7, and 8. And that's kind of enjoyable time as kids were growing up. So we're going to talk about what the port construction section that I ended up working in or heading up, the responsibilities. We had a phenomenal contractor who had an idea of prefabricating ports, not building them in place, but prefabricating them, bring them in ready to install, and really speed up the time it takes to create or build a port facility. So we'll talk a little about, that was the DeLong Corporation. We'll talk a little bit about the DeLong Corporation and the components that they put together for the Republic of Vietnam, and then start off with where things were in early 1966, and then look at a little crisis that the Air Force had at a location halfway up the coast at a place called Tuiwa. And then with that, I think you'll have a pretty good idea with this little case study of what the whole port construction effort was. So we could make a case study out of every one of the locations where we put ports in, from Quy Nhon on the north to Cam Ranh Bay in the middle to Vung Tau on the bottom. Those were the three major ports. But we were a little delayed in that with a problem at Vung Ro and helping the Air Force out. And so as we finish up, just a very quick survey of what we ended up doing at those three major port cities. So here we go. Army Port Construction section. Well, if I don't push the wrong button here and have to go through it, I was chief of the port construction section. Don't pay too much attention to that word chief, because I was chief of myself. It was a very small group. It consisted of me with a fresh Master of Science in Coastal Engineering and my professional engineer license, and a first lieutenant from the Corps of Engineers. He had a Bachelor of Science, but he wasn't even a hydraulic engineer. No hydraulics background, no coastal background, no river background. He was more of a structural engineer. And then a very, very brave volunteer from the Army Corps of Engineers Portland District, a civilian who was a dredging expert. Everybody know what a dredge is? You know, it's like a big vacuum cleaner that you go out in a river or you go out in a harbor. It sucks up the mud. It makes things deeper so you can get bigger ships in. And he was an expert in dredging. Actually, my first lieutenant was Lieutenant William Darling, and my dredging expert was a fellow by the name of Ogden Beeman. In effect, Lieutenant Darling was a gopher. What's a gopher? What's a gopher in slang, right? Not a little animal that crawls around the ground. Go for that, go for that, go for that. But he was a great gopher. He was ambitious. He was very conscientious. Sometimes I had to be in 4 places at once. Well, I can't be in 4 places at once, and I could send Bill out and know that he was going to take care of things and do a good job at it. And you'll see at the end, he got an opportunity to use his expertise in structural engineering. So let's see what duties they gave me. With the duties they gave me, I should have been a full colonel, frankly, but I was a fairly junior captain with just 2 silver bars on. I was the contracting officer's representative for a $50 million contract from the DeLong Corporation to prefabricate and bring them in country and install them. I had the authority, my boss, the contracting officer, was at the Army Materiel Command in St. Louis. That's a long way away and difficult to communicate. So he gave me the authority to make field changes to both the siting and the configuration of the piers as they were installed in Vietnam. I had a responsibility with my coastal background to determine feasible port locations based on coastal engineering criteria. And in doing that, I dealt with two-star generals, the commanding general of the Engineer Command and the commanding general of the Logistical Command. Engineer Command, obviously responsible for construction. Logistical Command, obviously the huge responsibility of keeping things flowing into Vietnam so that both the buildup and the activities could be supported. Along with that, we needed to get and make the bottom of a lot of the ports, harbors, deeper. So I had my assistant who helped me with a $20 million dredging program. And just the three of us, which meant just the one of us, was responsible for the in-house design, not hire a contractor, for all other port-related structures, such as the design of rock-filled causeways to go out and reach the port or connect the pier from where it was placed to the ground, okay? In a lot of cases, we needed to have rock-filled causeways to connect the piers. I was responsible for in-house analysis of all coastal engineering issues, and because there were only three of us and we didn't have any equipment, the things on shore were going to be the responsibility of Army Corps of engineer units, and I had to coordinate that with them. So pretty big job for a fairly young, well, a heck of a lot younger than I am right now, that's for sure. No gray hair yet, but they started over here. So here I am, port construction section open for business. And I had some resources. Well, there's something kind of funny with those two desks. The other one was Bill Darling's desk. What do you see strange about those desks? Say, the way you would walk into any engineering office today and look at a desk. And it's not something that's there, it's something that is missing. No computers, no computers. We didn't even have a handheld calculator. Back in 66, 67, they weren't there. What I had, and I should have brought it up because I find most people have never seen a slide rule, but what I had was a slide rule. And
I saw one of those.
Have you seen one? Yeah. Do you know how to use it? I used to know how to use it, but I don't anymore.
Same time you were using it.
What resources did I have? I had my textbook from Coastal Engineering at Berkeley. I had a great publication by the Army Corps of Engineers, Waterways Experiment Station, or Coastal Engineering Research Center, called Shore Protection Planning and Design. It was a 1-volume issue at the time, but now it's a 3-volume issue. It's called Technical Report Number 4. And not, oh heck, I had a couple of manuals from the Navy on port and harbor work, you know, because that's their primary responsibility. But, well, we'll get to this in a minute. But I didn't have anything specific on coastal conditions or ocean conditions in Vietnam. But, yeah.
You just brought up a great point. Why wasn't the Navy doing this?
Aha, I didn't want to get into that. But, hey, the Army pulled a snooker on you, I'll tell you. The Army, Navy, and Air Force, this is getting a little off the point, but you had a damn good question, because it is strange. But the Army, Navy, and Air Force got together sometime in the 50s and divided the whole world up into construction zones. And the Navy said, okay, we want construction in Southeast Asia. And they got it. But here's what the Army did to the Navy. Besides beat them in the Army-Navy game every now and then. But,
Hey, we had 13 in a row.
yeah, right. No, this was not a construction contract because these piers were purchased by the Army Materiel Command, and it was billed and it was supported and financed as an equipment purchase, not a construction. Okay, now the Navy had some construction responsibility at the time, and I'll show you where that started and where that ended. But another quick comment that will become useful to us as we go along. As I said, I had a predecessor. He didn't have a lot of experience. He was kind of just filling a job because he didn't have a degree in hydraulics or coastal engineering. And I asked him, is there anything specific in country on the ocean conditions along the coast of Vietnam? And he said, well, I've heard that the Navy had a consulting engineer firm do some good work of what the typhoon conditions were, what the typhoon history was. And I said, were you ever able to find it? He said, no, I was never able to find it. And I said, you know, it sounds like I better do some scouting around and see if I can find this material, because it could be very valuable to us. So I went over to the Navy. They were probably mad because they weren't doing all the construction and we were doing the ports, but that's all right. They said, no, we've never heard of that. And I'm sure they were telling the truth. So I said, well, who besides the Navy might have this information? And at this time, the U.S. agency, it used to be called the U.S. Overseas Mission, which is now USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, was bringing, you know, bags of grain and food and things into the country. And I thought to myself, wow, they might have been interested in ports. So I go over to the embassy where the USAID office was, or U.S.Army at the time, and I snoop around a little bit, and I run into a fella that has a 6-volume set of coastal engineering studies done for USAID or U.S.Army about the 1966 time frame. And he happened to have 2 copies of them, 2 sets of them. And he said, oh, you have a use for this? Here, you can have a whole set. And the work was done by a West Coast firm called Daniel, Mann, Johnson, and Mendenhall. Well, that's a mouthful. So being in the military, what do you have to do when it's a mouthful? You got to come up with an acronym, right? So we called them, and my apologies to anybody who's named Jim, and my youngest son is named Jim. This is not meant to be a slur, but we called them the Dim Jim reports, because you got to throw some vowels in there, okay? The Dim Jim reports. They're going to be important to us as we go along. They were invaluable. So let's move along. I need to introduce you a little bit to this idea of the DeLong contract, which was the equipment purchase. It was actually founded by a Corps of Engineer Colonel DeLong, in World War II, had served in the Aleutians. And he had been responsible for standard construction of ports in the Aleutians. And when he got out after the war, retired, he said, there has to be a better way to do this. So he formed the DeLong Offshore Corporation and came up with the idea of prefabricating the piers. But a little bit of his experience was his contract was with the Army Materiel Command for the fabrication and installation of piers and prefabricated causeway components, 80-foot girder and trestle spans, and they'd actually started his contract in 1965 so he could get his whole process moving. And then he actually had his biggest Army contract with the so-called Texas Towers. Remember, during the Cold War in the 1950s, the fear was that we needed to be able to detect incoming missiles along the coast, and they put these so-called Texas Towers out with radar on them on both the East Coast and the West Coast. That was his first big break in terms of doing work for the services, and he patented what he called a DeLong air jack. You can't read this, but it will come up later. This air jack had a 500-ton lifting or driving capacity. We'll talk about that in a little bit coming up. So there's a Texas Tower. It does look a lot like a oil drilling platform, right? And that's why it's called a Texas Tower. There's one of his air jacks there, and here's the radar domes, and they're looking for incoming missiles during the Cold War time. So that's how he got his start, had considerable experience on that. But what he put together for Vietnam was rather unique. He put together a set of 2 different sizes of floating pier barges. Big, rectangular, kind of a little bow on the front so you could tow it. And they were called either A or B barges. The A barges were 300 by 80 by 13 feet, 300 feet long, 80 feet wide, 13 feet high. The B barges were about half that size. And he had prefabricated either trestle or girder causeway sections to make the connection from the piers to the shore. They also were fitted for these large circular support caissons, because you have to have like big piling, and we'll see some in a minute. They were 6 feet in diameter, a half a foot thick steel, and the barges, the A barges were fitted with, let's see, 10 of them. The B barges, being smaller, were fitted with 6 of them. And the nice thing was, if you hooked 2 300-foot A barges together, you know, toe to toe or nose to nose or whatever you did, you had a 600-foot pier, which is just the right size to get a C4 cargo ship or a C2 cargo ship docked and able to operate. So the pier barges were fabricated in shipyards in Japan. The basic units themselves, then they were towed by ocean-going tug to Hong Kong, where they were fitted out with these big circular caissons. And then from there, they were towed to the location they were going to be used in Vietnam. He also had 3 smaller self-elevating work barges, and we'll talk about them in a minute. I kind of thought of it as a Lego set, right? Legos, you have a whole bunch of different pieces. You can fit them together for the different needs that you have. You can adjust them for what you want to build. The only difference was this was a huge Lego set, okay? Here are 2 A barges hooked there, 1 A barge here, 1 A barge there. Let's not worry about it where it is right now, but we'll be coming back to this site because this is our case study site. And then these long 6-foot diameter and very long caissons. Oh, those aren't ants. Look carefully, those aren't ants. Those are 6-foot tall people. That gives you, I show this picture, give you an idea of the scale of what we were operating with. And so this turns out to have been installed in an interim situation, but I will tell you why, and we'll come back to this. And this was a big, in terms of equipment, big effort. DeLong had ocean-going tugs to move things around and bring them down from Hong Kong. He had what he called a work barge. He had 3 work barges. This looks kind of junky, but the work barges were equipped with a large crane that could be used to help drive those caissons into the bottom of the harbor. And the A barges had the work barges had a whole bunch of air compressors. We'll see why in a minute. There was a galley down here. There were sleeping areas. I'm kind of claustrophobic. I hated to sleep on a work barge, but I guess the Navy guys are used to being claustrophobic. And so it had machine shops. It had everything they needed to do their job. Okay? Each work barge was equipped with a big crane, 150-ton heavy lift crane, and it had a driving adapter for the top of that 6-foot diameter caisson. And if you couldn't drive it with the 500-ton jack, you could hammer it, bam, 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 to get it into the ground to hold the pier in place. A couple of ocean-going tugs, but as I said, the heart of the system was his patented 500-ton capacity DeLong air jock, and we'll talk about those in a minute. In fact, let's take a look at a picture of a typical air jack. This is the surface area of a DeLong pier. Here's another one in the background. And the bottom part and the top part were run by what he called pneumatic grippers. They were like putting a big inner tube, a rubber inner tube, around that caisson and filling it up with enough air to grip tightly to the caisson, both the top one and the bottom one, and then the force came out of these hydraulic cylinders. In fact, you can see in the background, I didn't do this on purpose, here's the hydraulic cylinders extended that could move the upper pneumatic section and the lower pneumatic section to help you to drive the caisson into the ground. In a little way, this shiny steel, you've seen something like that before. In fact, if you drove to work today, you use the idea of the ability of hydraulic cylinders to multiply force, right? You used it where? To put the brakes on, did you have to go, man? No, you just tap the brakes, and even if you got your car, 1,000, 2,000 pound car going 50 miles an hour, the brake drums are enough force is transmitted to the brake drums to stop your car. So you also use them if you go to Jiffy Lube, and what do they do on Jiffy Lube? They have you drive up on these ramps, and all of a sudden, boom, this nice shiny steel, bigger than this, but at Jiffy Lube, lifts your car up into the air, right? Well, there's not a gorilla down there, going like this. There's a hydraulic cylinder that's multiplying the force to get your car up in the air. So very common. We've all run into them, maybe unknowingly. But effectively, what you could do to use here's my caisson, okay? Leftover paper holder. So here's the gripper section at the top, all right? Here's the gripper section at the bottom, and they are connected by the hydraulic cylinders. I want to drive this in. So you release the lower cylinder so it doesn't bind, and you use the hydraulic cylinder to drive it, okay? And then close it again, move the cylinder up, take another bite, drive it, drive it, drive it. Or you could reverse it and you could back it out, that caisson back it out if you wanted to. So depending on what you had underneath, you could put it in at a rate with just pure sand from 2 to 20 feet per hour. You could drive that in and get the penetration you needed to support the pier. And actually, you would think this would be a NASA-type control panel. No, it's a little homemade, welded together air jack controller, and the person who was trained on this could play it like a piano, and he'd be there, release, grip, hydraulics, release, grip, hydraulics, and they got very, very good at it, and they worked very, very well. Well, once you get the caissons driven in to the point where they will hold the pier up and the load of trucks and things like that, you didn't want them there anymore. So you cut them off, 1/2-inch thick steel, and you cut a hole in here, and inside is the structure of the pier barge, and you got a welding ring right here, and you put that in the hole and had your welder weld the caisson after you've jacked the pier barge up to operating height, weld the caisson in place so it's fixed in place, and these are like around the perimeter, maybe 4 to 6 of them. And so it was solidly held in place at the operating height, okay? So pretty neat and a nice system. And I will say that on a work barge, you had to be careful because there was a lot going on. You had to watch out for yourself. And why in the world do you think on a work barge that he might need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 air compressors? Why would he need? He had to have something to drive those grippers, right? Well, when you go to the gas station and you get the hose out and you go, how many pounds do you inflate your tires to? 28, 40, 38. The upper and lower grippers were inflated to 345 pounds per square inch. What would happen to your car if you could do it, if you kept pushing on the boom, boom, boom? Your whole tire would blow up. It couldn't take it. But the material that the grippers were made out of were made to take that. Now, this was a noisy place, very noisy. With these running, we had no ear protection. So here comes 20% of my disability because I spent a year under those conditions without even having cotton to put in my ears, no ear protection available. And so that did a number on my ears. Okay, let's get down to brass tacks here and start looking at what our program was. Our friends in the Navy had total responsibility of what is, it looks like one corps, but it was called I Corps, and based in Da Nang. And then for the port construction, 2 corps in the middle, 3 corps down in the Saigon area, 4 corps in the Mekong Delta. This was my responsibility. And we were planning to put or expand ports at Quy Nhon, to service the upper 2 corps area, at Cam Ranh Bay, and at Vung Tau. Had 3 ports that we were going to put, expand or put ports in. So up in I Corps area, it was the Navy responsibility. The Marines were deployed there, and the Marines construction capacity were called CBs, right? We've heard of CBs. They were in World War II, right? So if you call construction battalion CB, why not come up with a patch? Okay, here's the CB patch. I guarantee you, I love this patch. If I had known the CBs had that patch and it looked so neat, I would have gone to Annapolis instead of West Point, just to have that patch. And it gets the point across. The CBs, okay, here this B has a wrench, here he has a hammer, and their motto is great, just very short, can do. It's kind of like, you call, we haul, right? Can do. But why is he carrying a machine gun? That doesn't have anything to do with construction. Well, the CBs for the Navy and the engineer construction battalions or engineer battalions were responsible and had a secondary mission. We were trained to fight as infantry if necessary. So we had both a major construction responsibility on both sides and also trained to fight as infantry. Status of the capacity in early '66, just as I was coming in country. Tremendous backlog of shipping. If you looked out at the Pacific Ocean, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of cargo ships waiting as far away as Okinawa and the Philippines to find space to unload in Vietnam. So the construction of port facilities was very, very critical. Actually, it was so critical that it would impact all tactical and strategic planning in country. This will come in a minute. Just remember that outside of Vietnam, De Long had planned to put in kind of a staging area in Okinawa, but we're going to have a reason for changing that role in a minute. Okay, here's what the plans were in early '66. At Quy Nhon up north, planned a De Long pier with 4 deep draft berths. In Cam Ranh Bay, planned to have upgrade the U.S. overseas mission with the 497th Port Construction Company. I'll just abbreviate it, PCC. We planned 4 DeLong piers with 8 deep draft berths, 3 cargo piers, and 1 ammunition pier. And then way down south in Vung Tau, we support for the Saigon area and the Delta area, 1 DeLong pier with a long prefabricated causeway and 2 deep draft ports. So here we were, Quy Nhon, Cam Ranh, and Vung Tau as we got started. And my job was kind of like juggling 3 tennis balls. You know, I had 3 things going in different parts of the country. Quy Nhon, Cam Ranh, Vung Tau, Quy Nhon, Cam Ranh, Vung Tau. And we just kind of had that under control, and a problem developed with our friends in the Air Force, okay? They were putting in a new tactical airstrip halfway between Quy Nhon and Cam Ranh Bay in a place called Tuiwa. It was north of a bay called Vung Ro Bay, which was not near a town, was not planned for any port construction, and they had a turnkey contractor who had contracted to build everything they needed, the airstrip, the support facilities, the hangars, and a port to supply it. And so what's a turnkey contractor? What's the word turnkey mean in construction? If you had a house built, what would turnkey?
When you come with your money and take the
Yeah,
take it.
yeah. You want your house to have everything in it, right? You just want to be able to move in and settle down. You want to be able to turn the key at the door, walk in, and start putting your furniture in. Well, that's what this contractor was supposed to be doing, including building a port in the Songbar River just north of Tuiwa. After 3 months of working, the dredging contractor who was trying to provide enough depth in the bottom to build a port or to install a port said, I give up. This is impossible. We can't do it in the Songbar River. And so the question came down through channels, hey, we haven't talked to Army ports, but can they help out? I was asked to put together a briefing in early or late September 1966 for the commanding general of the Engineer Command and a commanding general of the Logistics Command. So here was a captain with 2 silver bars, and I had to brief 2 two-star generals. And my boss in the Engineer Command was very supportive. I mean, he understood the ins and outs of engineering. Unfortunately, the 2-star general in charge of the Long Command had an entirely different responsibility. He had to be able to plan for what he could get in the country. And so we gave the briefing, okay? I gave the briefing, and the Log Command commander said, what do you need and how soon can you promise that we'll have a port in? Well, here's the problem. Here was Vung Ro Bay, hadn't been looked at all. Here was an old dilapidated airport. The Air Force would not try to land planes across a railroad track. That's just the old days. And here's where the port was going to go in the Songbar River. Just real quickly, we look at the Songbar River. It's in river engineering, we would call this a braided river. Lots and lots of sediment coming in, and lots of material that would have to be dredged to keep this port open. Their plan was to put the port in this area here to help supply the airfield. Here's their dredge before he decided to quit. And he's working, there's the entrance. He's working, he's pumping, trying to build this out as a little barrier. And this is where he gave up, because as fast as the river flows, a little bit of the sand and sediment, or actually quite a bit of the sand and sediment, would make its way over here. There's no more river current over here. It would just deposit out, and it would fill it back up as fast as he tried to unfill it. And the other problem was, in addition to the river flowing in, up and down the coast, there's sand that's moving up and down the coast, up and down the coast. You can see an offshore bar here where these waves are breaking. And so to keep this port open, you'd almost have to continuously dredge that offshore bar. It just wasn't going to work. So the call came down, and I had about 10 days to look at this and give my proposed solution. I said, just give up on the song bar. You're fighting infinity there. You're never going to make it. I liked the look of Vung Ro Bay. It was about 10 kilometers south of the airfield. No one had investigated it as a possible port, but we had those two A barges that would make a 600-foot pier just sitting up in Okinawa. So my suggestion was, bring the A barges down and we'll install them in Vung Ro Bay. But in order to do it, we had to locate a suitable quarry site. We had to get local engineers to open the quarry and build a stone causeway. We decided to play with our Lego set and move a third girder span up from Vung Tau. It would reduce our need for rock by about 10,000 cubic meters. Local engineers would need to cut a road up from the port to the main highway about 4 kilometers away, and then they'd take the main highway up to the airport 10 kilometers away. However, the log command commander wouldn't recognize that a lot of these things, I didn't control the local engineers who were going to play a key role. I didn't control the local engineers who would need to cut the road. But he said to me, I started to say some buts and some ifs, and he said, Captain, you don't understand. We need a date certain when your port will be open, if you put it there. And I started to say, but sir, and he said, no buts, Captain. I want to know a date certain, like right now, because there's so much going to rely on having that port open at a certain time that, so I got a little pissed, frankly. You don't want to, if you get pissed, you don't want to show it in front of a 2-star general when you're a captain. But I finally just said, well, this guy's not going to take no for an answer. And I just said, after we get the 2 A barges down from Okinawa, after we get the 2 A barges down, we will have a 2-berth pier in operation in 4.5 months. Now, normally, regular construction, it would take a year to build a port. But I had a couple of tricks up my sleeve. Before I got there, there were 2 A barge, the long piers put in Cam Bay in 3 months. And right after I got there, because of the prefabricated, right, they arrive all ready to go, because of the prefabricated, and then my first 3 months there, I installed a 2-berth long pier. However, at Cam Bay. However, we didn't have to open a quarry. We didn't have to have a causeway extension. We didn't need support from local engineers, not at least in any big way. So I was taking a little bit of a chance. Yep.
Local engineers, were those Vietnamese?
No, they were U.S. Army Corps of Engineer folks. Engineer battalions, like the 65th Engineer Battalion was over there with the 25th Division at the time. They'd be the local engineers that I would coordinate with, and the port construction company. Yeah.
Did PA&E have anything to do with what you're doing?
No. There were PA&E, many other. The Navy had, boy, these acronyms are great. The Navy had Pacific Architect and Engineers. They were primarily doing electrical work, I think, but they were not involved with what we did. And the Navy also had a major construction contract with RMKBRJ, Raymond, Morrison, Knutson, Brown, Root, and Jones. And they didn't have anything to do with the ports. They did buildings and airfields and things like that.
How many hours a day did you work?
What?
How many hours a day did you work?
Oh, are you kidding me? 7 days a week, pretty much 18, 20 hours a day. I went over at a fighting weight of about 160 pounds. I went home at about 130 pounds. It was a tough year. It was a busy year. Okay, General Westmoreland, the briefing went up. I prepared the briefing for the two stars. General Westmoreland went up, briefing went up, and they briefed the commander, U.S. Army, Vietnam, and he approved it in early October. He said, this sounds like a good idea. I was riding back from the briefing. I had not been allowed in a room with His Royal Highness, General Westmoreland. Mere captains are not going to go in. The two-star generals briefed him with my briefing paper. And I was riding back with the commander of the Log Command, and he was a good guy. He said, Pete, how certain are you that you can do this? Because I saw when I said 4.5 months, he kind of rolled his eyes. What is that captain getting me into? And I said, sir, I'm about 90% certain of having it done if we get a little luck. If we get bad luck, like it's typhoon season, I can't predict that. But I said, I'm about 90% certain. And he said, well, what do you need? And he said, what do you need to make it happen? And I said, well, I can't hitchhike rides around country. You know, you could go Space A anywhere in the country if you had orders, but I can't wait to go Space A. I need to be able to get around country, with the representative of the Geelong Corporation, whose name happened to be John Paul Jones. A nice Navy nautical name. We need flights to get around country. From those local Army engineers, U.S. Army engineers units, we need priority support. We need to divert those Okinawa A barges to come down to Bunro. That's way above my pay grade as contracting officer. It only extended to Vietnam. I needed support for the Navy to do a hydrographic survey, which had never been done at Bunro. And I needed survey support from the port construction company. Fortunately, a classmate of mine was the CO of that company, and we worked together pretty well. And then I need to do a study that would determine the optimum siting of the pier. We're running a little into time, but I had a set of orders that would let me bump anybody but a full colonel or a general for this Beechcraft Queen Air to fly us, myself and John Paul Jones, around country. I had a set of orders that I could go into any Army airfield, and if I saw a helicopter sitting around doing nothing, I could commandeer it and say, we need to go here. So we had some support. The hydrographic survey was the important thing. I needed a Navy shore patrol boat with a sonic sounder. What's a sonic sounder? Any fishermen? Any fishermen use a fish finder? Yeah. To peek down there and see where the fish are? Yeah, sonic sounder just pings down and you get an idea of what the depth is by the time at which it takes for the ping to come back up. We had to have survey base stations from the port construction company. Luckily, that was my classmate. We had to find out what the bottom contours were in Bunro Bay itself. I needed to know what the prevailing wave was, conditions, coastal conditions, but I really needed to know what the typhoon wave was. Fortunately, those were tabulated in the DIMGIM study. And then I would do what's called a refraction study. I'll show you it in a minute. And we would use that to site the pier. Well, we went in loaded for bear, okay? Oh, one other quick thing. We needed security from a local infantry unit because this was still hotly contested territory. Well, just north of the Songba River, the South Korean detachment was there, and the South Korean detachment had a rules of engagement that said, we take no prisoners. And, you know, if you have people pulling security for you, you want the meanest people in the world, and whatever their rules of engagement are fine with me. I'm not controlling them, but if they're mean and the Viet Cong are scared of them, we're going to be a little bit more safe. So we did that. We flew. I'd never set foot. I had circled over Bunro Bay a couple of times, had an idea what it looked like. We went in loaded for bear, even though we knew we had some security. We got a Navy patrol boat with a good sonic sounder to support us. And here's what the end result was. We spent about 2 weeks off and on. Here's Bunro Bay, surveying the dark lines or what the bottom contours look like. This contour here is the 6 fathom line. Hey, Navy folks, what's 6 fathoms? What's a fathom? 6 feet. Okay, so here was the 36-foot line, very close to shore, and then the 12 fathom line right up against it. So I decided this was the most appropriate place to site the pier, and then what I did was like a homework problem, almost identical homework problem that we'd had at Berkeley. I had just a plastic template that let me figure out, running it along the contours, how the prevailing waves would come in if a typhoon approached from the south. And I was more interested in the long dot dash line, how the typhoon waves would come in. And so I chose the place where the contours were closest to the ground, the deep water, and I made the orientation of the pier perpendicular to the typhoon waves. Okay? My friend Larry is, or Gary is, I'm going to have a question for Larry in a minute. My friend Gary is a world-class kayaker, and he knows how important it is to understand what the waves are and what the waves are doing. He kayaks Poudre River more often than his wife Leah, I think, wants him to. But no, she doesn't care. Okay, Gary, go ahead and go kayak, and I'm going out shopping. Give me your credit card. Here's what we had going on. This is a little deceptive. These weren't there. There was nothing existing when we started, but when we finished, this is what the existing at that time port, and then there were some plans to expand it. Well, let's look real quickly. We had a tough schedule, 4.5 months to do this. I got a telex from John Paul Jones in early December, and he said, hey, a barge arriving, said the A, right, the 300-foot barge, a barge arriving with girder spans on Tuesday, like, for example. And I thought there was a typo because it should have said A barges. They went up there to get 2 300-foot barges and bring them down. I thought it was a typo, but he said, come on up, I'm moving a work barge down from Quignon, and I had the pilot fly around Bunro, and it wasn't a typo. I looked down, there was only one pier barge. And so I frantically waved my travel orders when we landed at the airbase, grabbed a helicopter, flew in, and I said, John Paul, what is going on here? This is going to kill us. And he said, well, we had a problem with one of our captains, tugboat captains. He looked at the kind of the chart of Bunro Bay, and he thought there was too much high ground surrounding Bunro Bay, and so John Paul said, actually we called him Captain Tuna because he had done this before, and he said, Captain Tuna said he would not go into Bunro Bay, so we had to find a replacement. And I said, what do you mean, to John Paul, what do you mean, Captain Tuna? And he said, you know, Captain Tuna, chicken of the sea. So he said, he just won't go in any place dangerous, but we got a replacement. The second A barge arrived in mid-December, and then John Paul and I decided to use those as an interim pier and then move on down with the other things that are going on. So we'll move a little quickly here. Okay, there's the interim pier. That's a ground picture of the first one that I showed you. It's 2 A barges hooked in. It's only a temporary configuration. We just dropped the caissons just to hold it in place, but they could still unload, although somewhat awkwardly. There's the drillers drilling ahead, getting rock for the causeway. And by early December, we had the interim pier in. The quarry operations finished up in early January. The causeway was ready with the rock fill and the base for the girder spans in early March. And we were going to move the A barges over in early April. Let's see, December, January, February, March. If we could get those A barges over by the middle of April, my promise of 4.5 months would have been kept. And then there were some other facilities that were going to be built after, but at least the port, and that's the only thing I promised the Log Command commander, and we were able to do it. Here's the rock-fill causeway. Here's the supports for the girder spans. We had 3 of them, and that third one that came up from Vung Tau in our Lego set helped us reduce the amount of fill we needed by 10,000 cubic meters. So that really put us ahead of the game. And then there's moving from the interim position, there's the 2A barge pier with the 3 girder span, and there's my rock-fill causeway. I didn't design it as a road with stone on it. I used the coastal engineering manual and designed it as a rubble mound breakwater so it could take waves. And there's the most beautiful picture in the world. If I had the ability to blow that up to 5 times, I'd put it on the wall in my office. As pretty a picture as you can see. Here's the rock-fill causeway. Here is the girder span. 2 ships actively unloading. And let's move on and just kind of take another quick look. Okay, there's another shot. LST, what's LST stand for? Landing Ship Tank, used in World War II, still used during the Vietnam War. And another shot, here's the pier at Vung Ro. This was a little stubby pier that the Navy had some extra things. You could use it for barge offloading. And here's the road that was cut by our Army engineers up to the main highway, QL1, and then 10 kilometers over to the airfield. And we made it a week early. Okay? However, we had a good test. At this time, November '67, a typhoon passed just off of Cape Varela that enclosed Vung Ro Bay. Winds were 85 to 90 knots. A knot is a little more than a mile per hour. 100 knots, gusts to 100 knots. And I had a friend over there who said, we had observers underground and 8 to 10 foot waves. I put it in red, were breaking directly over the end of the pier. Is that a good deal or a bad deal, Gary?
That's a good.
That's exactly what you want, right? You want it breaking over the end of the pier, not on the side of the pier, the minimum area exposed to the waves. That refraction study must have been correct. A little bit of erosion at the nose of the causeway, easily repaired and operations resumed when wave conditions permitted. And then just a quick note we'll refer to in a minute. In the Jim report, it said that in a 50-year period, you could expect 37 typhoons to pass up within 60 kilometers of the Vietnam coast, generally from south to north, Vung Tau to Quy Nhon. Okay? Got about 5 minutes to wrap it up. So quick question.
How long did that pier last? Is it still there?
I'm going to get to that. You ruined my surprise. But we'll get to it. Okay, we're going to start north at Quy Nhon and just kind of show you what went in. There were 4 berths going in. This was an old French causeway. They never succeeded in getting it to deep water, so we started with that. This is from north to south, and here's the 4-berth, 4A barge pier. So this is 300, 600, 900, 1,200 feet long, and all 4 berths are in use at the same time. This is a port operating area at Quy Nhon. Everything was going good when, uh-oh, I got a call, and literally, I wouldn't say this, but this is the call I got. Said, hey, Pete, you better get your ass up here in a hurry because something happened last night. And I said, what? He said, the VC managed to get a frogman in with magnetic mines, and they sunk a cargo ship right up against the DeLong Pier in Quinyon. Fortunately, the Navy saved the day. They had a salvage vessel or salvage crane on a barge, and they had that cargo ship refloated and out of there within about a week, and the whole thing was back in operation. So let's duck down to Cameron Bay real quick, okay? Sheltered Natural Harbor, had the 497th Construction Company. I think the most important thing is here in red, harbor facilities at Cameron Bay supported the largest logistical base in the Republic of Vietnam and the largest port facility constructed by the Army Corps of Engineers since World War II. It was the main logistical base. And here it is. The ammo pier was over here, made out of B barges. Here's a tanker offloading so you could get fuel. This is Cameron Bay number 1. This is Cameron Bay number 2, 2A barges and girder spans. This is the old U.S. Operations Mission Pier here. And then finally working on Cameron Bay, 2 work barges, and just about finish it up with the 2 connecting girder spans, and the Port Construction Company had run sand out here and put a sheet pile bulkhead. This is a look at the old U.S.Army Pier. This was the harbor master's operating area. This was a spooky building right here. During World War II, this building was the headquarters for the Imperial Japanese Navy for all of their operations in the South Pacific, including invasion of the Philippines. And so walking down the halls of that, you could almost feel the ghosts of those Imperial naval officers with their big samurai swords on. And let me slip on down. I'm getting the high sign. Down at Vung Tau, we moved everything we had into Vung Tau. We didn't have any A barges left. We had a lot of dredging down there because it was in the Mekong Delta. Here is the causeway. We used all the remaining components, and we made this pier out of B barges. This is a B barge for causeway and 4 B barges together. We needed a little more length. We had 2 more B barges left over, and so here's the last 2 B barges going in, and here's the dredge operating away. And one quick little story about this little structure right here. I told you I had a really good gopher, a structural engineer in First Lieutenant Bill Darling, and I called him into the office and said, hey, Bill, I got a job for you. And he said, for me? Yeah, all you. It's for you. We need a structural engineer to design. We got tons of sand in Vung Tau, and we need to get it into the Delta. So we need you to design standard construction, a sand offloading into a barge, and he came up with a neat idea. He designed the substructure. He designed it so you could go to the beach, fill a dump truck in, back it up, dump the dump truck into the hopper fed the conveyor belt filled the barge up, and it was hauled off to the Delta because they couldn't even make cinder block down there because they didn't have any sand. Well, by this time, we were all down at Vung Tau. We were actually, DeLong had it was so darn hot you couldn't sleep on an or on a work barge. So we were actually hunkering down in a villa, a beach villa that we actually shouldn't have used because it was contractor's facility, and I, as the contractor, should not be accepting gratuities from the contractor. But you know what I said? what are they going to do? Send me to Vietnam? if we are comfortable. So we were all up for breakfast one morning, and we hear this boom. And we jump in the Jeep and say, oh man, we hope that the Long Pier's okay. Well, the Long Pier was okay, but unfortunately, the folks that were going to operate the port had asked permission from John Paul and I to store flammables on the Long Pier. And we said, not only no, but hell no. When you take over the pier, you can do what you want, but not while we have control of it, not till you. So they snuck 55-gallon drums of diesel fuel out onto that timber or that sand offloading facility. Somebody dropped by and threw a grenade in the middle of it and set it on fire. I took this picture. And because it was built out of creosote, the whole thing burned down. I thought Bill Darling was going to cry. But, you know, c'est la vie. It's all's fair in love and war. So 18 ports, Army ports, 18 deep draft berths at 4 port locations in 12 months. And by the time I left in June '67, the logistical logjam with all those hundreds of boats waiting for a berth at a pier had been eliminated. One very quick, yeah.
On those piers, you drive them to some resistance.
Yeah, we drive those caissons in.
You cut them off.
I cut them off at the pier level. Yeah. And had a cap on them so no one will fall down that hole. Let's just take a final look. I was 70 to 71, I was an advisor up in the Central Highlands. I don't like to talk about that tour. It was really useless. But one of the added features of the Long Pier, not only can you drive the caissons in, you can reverse the process with the air jacks. And so when things were going to hell in a handbasket in '72, '73, a contract was awarded to a Korean company to retrograde all the Long Piers, to pull the caissons out, move them out, and put them in storage somewhere so that the North Vietnamese, inevitably, who were going to overrun the country, wouldn't have advantage of ready-made ports. And so they did a good job. I looked at a State Department memo. I was writing a paper on this just to create the history of what happened. And in the State Department memo said that the Korean company successfully moved all the piers out of Vietnam, except they had a problem with one. One of the A barges being towed across the South China Sea was hijacked by pirates and taken into Hong Kong and sold for scrap. Kind of talking about going full circle. Well, I was putting this presentation together, and a friend of mine happened to look over my shoulder and said, "What's Fun Row look like today?" And I said, "I don't know, let's go on Google Earth and take a look." So we go over to his computer, he takes a look. Holy moly, that pier that I sited and installed 57 years ago is still there. The 2 A barges, the girder spans, looks like there's been some repairs on the Rockville Causeway, which would not be unexpected, because in a 50-year period, you're expecting something like 20 to 30 typhoons coming up the coast. So even though we can't say can do like the Seabees do, the Corps' motto is essayons, we will try. That seems a little weak in terms of, but I would rather have we build to last as our motto, but I'm not in a position to change that. If anybody wants a copy of this paper, I have PDFs of it. I have my business card up here. Send me a note and say I'd like a copy of the paper, and I will send you a PDF digital copy. Thanks for your attention, and apologize for running over.
So really like to thank Peter Lagasse, and we'll have some questions here in just a minute, but on behalf of the museum, I'd like to present you with that challenge coin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you once again for a fascinating talk. Another round of applause, if you folks would. real quickly, I wasn't sure if you had mentioned this, but Peter and I were talking earlier, and I really hope that our military today is drawing upon the experience of people from the past, people that have a wealth of experience, as you saw here.
Even looking at papers like this.
Yes, and I hope that they are doing that. And did you mention anything about Gaza? You had mentioned about that.
Yeah, remember the humanitarian crisis in Gaza where there were so many people starving and they tried to get a port in and they never succeeded in doing it. And I thought, wow, if they only knew about the DeLong Pier concept, they could have a port in 3 months or less. I tried to get through the barriers. I don't have any classmates who haven't retired, so I don't have any contacts at the Pentagon. I tried to get through the dial-in phone system in the Pentagon, and I think everybody I talked to thought it was some kook. I never got in to talk to anybody with any importance. I was just kept put off, and I said, well, what the heck? You can only try so hard.
Couple of questions. Go ahead.
Is the DeLong company still doing this?
No. Their patent, I think Colonel DeLong, and I worked for him for a year. I don't think he had a first name. I think his first name was Colonel. I'm almost sure. But they're out of business. I have no idea. But I do know a French company called Mustang has taken over the patent on the DeLong air jack and has come up with a better way to do the upper grippers. So I've written him a letter and said, hey, I'll come over and give this presentation if you pay my way to France.
Did he take you up on it?
Haven't heard back yet. I can hope.
Hold your breath. How long did a set of those grippers last? How many piers would you?
How long?
Yeah, how many piers?
You mean in terms of, I don't know. This Mustang, we never had a problem with them in the year that I was there. This Mustang company has come up with a way to put lugs on it like a snow tire, and they claim that they can take a greater amount of shear without stripping it off. They claim to have improved the pneumatic part of the air jack, but we never had a problem with it the year they worked perfectly. And DeLong was a contractor, delivered everything they promised.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Did we need this in any of the Middle East wars, on piers somewhere to get equipment somewhere, or not? We didn't, apparently, right?
No.
Okay.
No, not like this. This is the only place I know we used the DeLong concept and a prefabricated pier concept that I know about.
Any questions? Well, thank you once again, Peter. That was very fascinating. I'd like to, Peter's going to be here for a few minutes to take questions individually if you want, but